what are the aspects of project performance? What are the aspects of project performance? We started in the beginning with saying what makes a good project. So think about it. What are the aspects that a project will be measured against to determine its performance as a project?
Milestones, financials, efforts.
Milestones, so more of scope. You talked about budget, so money. You talked about something else. What was the third one?
Efforts or labor that you may have allocated, you may have, depends how you're evaluating a project, maybe fiscally, or it may be efforts because you don't particularly manage money.
Yeah, so I'll put that as part of scope as well, because the more the scope, the more resources you need, right? So if you need to do more things, you need to get resources. What other
Time
things?
scale was mentioned?
Sorry?
Was the time scale mentioned already?
No, he didn't mention time scale. So I'll agree with you, Nuria. Time. If you have a time
Well,
scale,
I mean, I define that as milestones, but okay.
Okay.
Schedule. There's schedule to milestones. That there's something that underpins that.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess milestones can also mean like a progress, right? How you're.
Yeah, we'll talk about the terms used in imprints too, but you're in the right track in terms of your thinking.
Where are you with the, where are you against what you've set out to achieve versus what you've achieved at this point in time?
Is a risk part of performance as well?
Risk it is. Is indeed, yes. So limits on the plant's aggregated risks, I'll agree, I'll take that. In fact, let me put them up on the screen. Costs, time, quality, sustainability, scope, risk, and benefits. And benefits. So these are the 7 aspects of project performance as provided by Prince2. Cost, time, quality, sustainability, scope, risks, and benefits. Now, I know that sometimes you call them something different. For the exams and for the purpose of understanding, please stick with these 7 because you need them so that you don't get confused in terms of what each means. And I know that some of the things you've mentioned, you've tied it into, say, for example, milestones and all of that. Some of them are tied in terms of scope, but very importantly, the 2 ones which are coming newly into this, which might not be so familiar with some people, or some people might not be so familiar with, are sustainability, and sometimes I hear people say benefits. So somebody will probably say, yeah, I understand cost, and yeah, I understand time, and yeah, I understand risk, and I understand scope and quality. But what is sustainability, and what are benefits? So I'll start with sustainability. So sustainability is put in the context that every project has an impact in some way on either the environment or the sustainability performance that have been set by the project. So I don't know within your organization if you have any sustainability targets you're looking to meet, but I believe that within the United Nations, they've laid out 17 self-sustainability targets. And I think you find that on the United Nations website. You'll find that in your book as well, that there are these, I believe it's 17 of them, targets. And out of those targets, any of them could apply to your targets. Now, I must be honest, in my projects, I've never really had a sustainability target. So nobody has said, oh, we have to, within this project, deliver the project using CO2 emission of XYZ or that sort of thing, right? So it's never come up in any of the projects, but it's a new thing that seems to be because of this whole climate change agenda, if you can call it, proposal, whatever you can call it, there is more emphasis that has come in from the perspective of sustainability. So I'm just going to quickly look let me show you guys the ones that are in your book. Sustainability. Find. United Nations Sustainability Goals. And you'll find this in your book, by the way. I'm just trying to show you the ones that they've. Yeah, there you go. So you should find it there. Don't think it's showing yet. Let's try sharing this one. New share. Not sure why it's not showing that one.
We were seeing it before, I think.
Oh, it came up on your screen because I thought it didn't. Okay.
It came for a few seconds, yeah.
Ah, that's good then. I was, yeah, my mistake. I thought it wasn't showing up. Let me bring it back up again. Can you see anything now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. I put it up for some reason. I thought it wasn't appearing. So these are the sustainability goals that, yeah, 17. So I was correct. Sometimes I mix it up with 12. But yeah, there's 17 of them. No poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water, sanitation. All of them, there's 17. Obviously, they're all in your book. I think it's page. Sorry, not page. Section 1.5.4 or table figure 1.3. So any of these could be a sustainability goal that has been the expectation is that over time, as things get more in focus, they're not mandatory. They're just sustainability goals that are usually added to projects. And like I said, it's become more popular these days. I think the key one that would affect you most likely will sit here. You might have, maybe there is a requirement that you shouldn't print more than a certain number of documents to save trees, cutting, all this
Well,
sort of stuff.
for us, something very important is the energy consumption. We have a lot,
Okay.
and we even use part of the energy that we produce in our processors for heating the buildings. So we already take into account some of these aspects. Indeed, we have to care. I mean, we are about weather and climate monitoring, and yes, we are quite climate conscious.
Okay, that's good. That's certainly good to hear. Like I said, for me as a project manager and delivering projects, I have hardly gone to projects where, and maybe because they're very profit based, so it's not really hardly gone to projects where they're insisting you have to follow this sustainability. So it's good to hear that really. But it's one of those aspects of project performance that has become more prominent these days. But it's good to hear that you have something around energy, and also potentially you have something around industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Again, some of these things the other things you might hear around infrastructure is how you get rid of the infrastructure within the organization. Like I talked about, printing targets you shouldn't print more than 100 copies of whatever for per project or that sort of thing. It will vary by organization. The second aspect, yeah, sorry, somebody was going to say something.
I was going to ask you also, Tai, why do we talk about aspects? I mean, what does it mean? Because before we saw that there are characteristics of a project, but now we talk about aspects. So what do they mean with aspects?
So the aspects of Prince2 is just in terms of language is they're referring to aspects of project performance. What areas or what things do you measure within a project to determine whether or not it is performing as it's meant to be? So, for example, you give out a scope, and the scope will be an aspect of project performance. Are we delivering to scope? Are we delivering within the scope that is agreed? Time, we've given it a sort of metric of time, and then we deliver based on that metric. Benefits. Think about a project that is being done somewhere in a third world country, or I don't like using the word third world countries. Let's say developing country. And maybe there's a lot of poverty there. And there are children who go to school and sit on the floor. So they don't get to learn effectively, because if you're sat in mud, your teacher, you can't hear your teacher because there's a lot of, stuff, distractions and all of that. It's not a healthy environment, etc. So think about a project that is set to build the classrooms or to renovate the classrooms, tile the floors, and then provide furniture so that the students can then sit on the chair and learn comfortably. The benefit of that could be that because before you started the project, they were probably not passing very well in terms of their GCSEs or their exams. And then by the time you're done with the project, they're able to pass their GCSEs, competing with countries that are maybe considered more developed countries. So it's not like they were not intelligent, they just didn't have the infrastructure. So your project is putting the infrastructure in. They are now then passing the exams that other people write in other parts of the world, and they are passing it. And that was your objective. So the benefit of the project was to deliver the chairs, deliver the infrastructure, deliver computers. The benefit of the project is 20%, 30% increase in the learning capabilities. It could also be, the benefit could also be 15% less students going to the hospitals. Because before that, they were probably coughing, they were probably on mud and stuff like that. And then now, obviously, there's a benefit to the project. So these are aspects of project performance that would make you measure to establish that the project is bringing the value that it should bring. Whereas the characteristics of a project is saying that what makes a project a project. I know that sounds a bit, but what makes you, you? For example, what are the characteristics that if I saw this thing, I would say this is a project and this is not one. That is now not measuring specific aspects to determine if the project is successful or not. That is saying, is this a project? That's the characteristic saying, is this a project or it's not? If you saw something that looked like a big cat, had a lot of hair, had claws, and it was walking towards you, I'm sure you would not be like, oh yeah, that looks like an elephant. You'll probably be on your heels and running away because you don't want the cat coming close to you, right? You clearly say it's either a lion or it's or one of these other, a leopard or something that looks like that, right? So that is a characteristic of a lion, for example, in that case. Whereas
But isn't that a direct?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I mean, obviously, there seems to be some level of correlation between the scope and the benefits, right? Because if you've set out with X scope to achieve X benefits, then in the life of a project, well, whether you meet full scope or not, well, those are determinable factors, and therefore the benefits may alter. But I'm wondering how when you're monitoring project performance, how you would evaluate that in any frequent way, that unless there is already an establishment of relationship between those things, in which case it's relatively evident. But
you should definitely have. You can't. London 2012. I seem to be referring a lot to that project, but we had it was in summer, the Olympics. We had at least maximum of 3 months before that to finish everything. So we will measure our success or the project performance on something like time based on an agreed, like you said, there is an interaction between time that we've been given and time we're targeting in our projects. Same thing applies to benefits, right? If the benefits are that those chairs have to provide some level of improvement in the GCSEs, if we do all of that and there is no improvement, then we did the wrong project. Maybe what we'd have needed was to go in and bring a motivational speaker in the class. Maybe the solution wasn't the chairs we brought, because if the benefit we're looking to achieve within the project was that we want the students to pass the exams, and we then did another project which now they didn't pass the exams, they did the calculations, and we saw that nothing has changed academically, because that is how the project will be measured against these performance targets, isn't it, or performance areas, aspects. So then we'll probably rethink that was probably the wrong thing. Maybe we needed a motivational speaker. Maybe we needed better teachers. Maybe the students were already okay. And I understand it's a tricky project because it was a tricky example because from a humanitarian perspective, you want them to sit on chairs rather than sit on the floor. But what I'm saying is that your benefits, if your aim of doing the project is to make profit, you might do all these nice things and you don't make profit. What then? your business case is not justifiable.
Yeah, but you could
That's
also
all.
argue that if you did some analysis along the route, you might determine that the outcome of the project's no longer worthwhile, and therefore, I mean, you see this with things like the train projects in the UK, where obviously the rewards versus now costs are altering to make the project just unviable anymore because uncertainty's creeping in and scope is altering and various other variables that may be non-controllable. But
and these will be the aspects that you are using to determine that. So you mentioned there about not you said they're not viable in terms of the project. One of the things that could be the viability is the cost, right? Where's my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
It could be the cost. And let me move this away. The cost could for many of the projects you've talked about, it could become impractical to deliver because at the end of the day, you end up spending so much money on those trains. The trains that don't come to life. You keep on pumping money into it. It doesn't make sense. So you will be measuring the cost because when it goes above cost or what was agreed as cost or budget, as you will call it, it tells you the poor performance of the project. Same thing with scope. So if things start to go out of scope creep, whatever it is, that is an aspect that you can quickly measure the performance of the project and determine that it's no longer viable. Same thing with sustainability. I know that not everybody at this point yet fully embraced sustainability, but I think it was Eduardo who was talking about energy, whatever it is, how much energy you're allowed to use. And the moment you start going out of that, the performance of the project could be compromised because you're probably, maybe within the world, you're probably being advertised as an organization that uses low energy and stuff like that. The moment within the project alone, somebody is flying for a meeting in Zurich and flying back, and they've already used up a certain level of CO2 emissions, which are beyond what the expectations are. Again, that could be a measure of the aspects of project performance, basically. So all of these potentially can measure, not necessarily, like I said, not necessarily all of them at the same time in all projects, because some of them, like I said, with sustainability, I've hardly ever had my project measured against that because there's no correlation, there's no target I've been given from that perspective. But yes, have they given me targets against budget? Yes. Scope? Yes. Risk? Yes. There's some risks that that are used to measure your level of success or performance of your project. Milan?
Yeah, I actually probably this sustainability is interesting point, as you pointed out, and probably it looks like the only aspect of the project which is not affecting the final product per se, right? Because all the other aspects are somehow affecting the product that you're delivering to the customer, except sustainability, which is like a side effect. And I see why it is so complicated to endorse this sustainability requirement.
But the sustainability could impact the cost, for example, because if you want to stick to a number of rules, maybe what you are producing is cost more than if you do in a different way. So the sustainability has impact on the final product.
Yeah, but if your brand image is essentially aligned to that, then obviously that's the cost you're going to bear, because otherwise your fulfillment of who you are, let's say, trying to be in the marketplace, couldn't be maintained. So I mean, I guess the sustainability element will vary a lot depending on who you are and what you're about, and what your target audience or market may be. I think benefits for us is a complicated one because they are extremely long term. I mean, the products, okay, can't talk about all of you, and all the products is very different, I'm sure. But in the case of what we do at MTG, I mean, we are producing products that improve, now weather forecasting, for example, which has, benefits to, various different industries in terms of weather predictions and these types of things, or a lightning instrument, improving things in air traffic, or other products which will, from the sound emission that will eventually go on to form both European level plus in-country level policies, because the accuracy of understanding, the chemical atmosphere around things will improve greatly. But these will be years beyond the satellite. I'm quite sure of that.
No, with certainly I agree with that. And then even the sustainability will vary widely depending on organizations. Like I said, I've been managing these projects for years and years, and it's only recently that I've started hearing that word sustainability a lot. Because again, we all know it's, it's on the news every day. It's about sustainability of the environment or something. So there's been a push to add these into different aspects of our business. And like you said, if your organization is claiming some level of sustainability, they would have to infuse it into your project. Otherwise, that could damage the reputation of the organization.
And there's been good examples of that, right? With clothing manufacturers eventually turning out to be far from providing any sustainability at all, and their brand gets seriously damaged.
Agreed. And claiming all this, even with manufacturing cars, right? They're producing products which they had to pull out. I don't know. I think they had to do this. There was this documentary I watched which were talking about their sustainability targets which they were given as part of the project with delivering the cars. And then when they checked, they were somehow dodging the whole thing with, I can't remember, I said it was a software that we're using to go.
Oh, Volkswagen.
Yeah. Well, I heard that there were a bit more than that, just Volkswagen, but yeah.
Probably.
So that's an example of a sustainability target that is tied to them as an organization, because you can't produce a car now today and ignore sustainability. It's almost.
But would you, in terms of the aspects of project performance, so in the beginning of when you're laying out a project, should you define those aspects that you are going to use to do project performance, and sort of narrow down how you're going to do that?
Yes, because these are 7 variables that the project manager needs to control, right? So you have to.
Yeah, some are absolutely obvious, but.
Sorry?
Some are obviously obvious, right? The cost, the time, the quality, those are pretty clear ones. But how risk fits in that, how scope fits in that, how benefits fit in that is a bit new for me, and an interesting bit to understand how you'd go about doing it.
Tomorrow or Thursday, depending on when we finish tomorrow afternoon. But if we finish, we'd cover risks as, for example, as one of the, and we'll go through all of that. But with something like risk, it will come down to things, well, I'll mention it anyway. It will come down to things like the risk tolerance of the organization, because there are some very risk-averse organizations, and there are some very risk-taking organizations. And so in the beginning of most of those sort of projects, some organizations will be very risk-averse. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't even go there. You can't, again, sometimes it's because of regulations, right? So one of the industries is the car industry, very highly regulated industry. The aviation industry, very regulated. So there's so much you can take in terms of risks. So if you're managing a project that relates to one of these industries, even the oil industry, I've got to teach in organizations that are oil related, and everything is about security, safety, because anything can blow up, especially when you go on offshore, right? Any error could blow anything up. So they are different within these different projects or different areas. There are risk tolerances, or there are certain risks you're not allowed to take. There are certain risks you can take, whether it's relating to safety risks or even relating to financial risk. A new organization that is not yet even broken even would probably be less risk active. There will be more risk averse to say, let's leave that. You can stay within these boundaries, etc. So it will vary. So things like risk, you would expect that. I agree with you. Some organizations will not necessarily specify this, or within the projects, they might not necessarily. They're not the obvious ones. The ones you mentioned, they're called the iron triangle. So they're pretty much the obvious ones. And that's why we call them variables, because for some of them, you might have a very long spoon. And what I mean by that is you've given them a very long opportunity to agree what the metrics will be. For some of them, you have a very short spoon. So you're just saying, look, the timing here should be very short. The quality is flexible. So long as we have this all the way to this, or fine. For some of them, the quality requirements or the quality expectation might be very, very tiny, and you don't have room to make any errors, especially where you have regulations in that area or that organization. So I was listening to somebody saying how much regulation there is in these industries, and they're in the millions. somebody said that they're down specific because it's safety about people living in cars, people on planes, and all of that. So it will
I
vary.
mean, it varies for us. It varies depending on which part of the segments you're dealing with, but their potential implications. But I'm more curious on how you, because obviously we do risk management, we do mitigations, we do all those kinds of practices, but more how that feeds into the performance itself. I think is an interesting bit. It's not obvious to me at this point.
Not from the, maybe not necessarily directly from the way that you currently manage projects, for a risk, using risk as an example. But if you were doing a project which was in aviation, for example, your primary, you would have clearly defined risk metrics in terms of performance, because any error or any mistake or any taking any risk that you are taking on that project will impact the human lives, right? Especially from an engineering perspective. So that would be that sort of area or part of an industry will definitely be much more risk, or focus more on details around risk. It sounds like with the projects you're doing, there isn't so much of an emphasis on it, which is probably why you are seeing it from that perspective. I know Antoine, your hand is up. Let me let you.
Yeah, I had a question actually. Performance, does it come under the practices, or we saw these 5 elements of project?
Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, I was just wondering this performance. We saw this diagram with the 5 P's: people, processes, principle, practices. So performance, does it come under practices?
No, it's not. No, it's not an integrated element. No, it's these aspects of project performance are not part of the integrated elements. So the integrated elements, like you mentioned, project context, people, processes, practices, and people at the center of the environment, or people in the center of the methodology. The aspects of Prince 2 are what used to be called the iron triangle. It added in, so it used to be scope, cost, quality, but there are areas or the variables that the project manager needs to control. So think about them as, because obviously this module, we're talking about project management as a whole, isn't it? So those are the Prince 2, like I call them pillars. So there are 5 Prince 2 pillars. This is talking about what do you need to control. And like I said, it doesn't mean that it must be risk. You must control risk in your organization the way I'll do it in my organization. But within specific organizations, some will be more prominent than others. Some will not be as prominent as others. It sounds like from your organization, what is more prominent is more cost. Maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like when you guys spoke, it sounds like you're more concerned about cost. It sounds like you're more concerned about quality for your clients. So with those ones, you might find that when you start your project, like Steve was saying, there will be more emphasis on clarifying this clearly, the quality that you'll need to deliver, and also maybe the cost as well. I don't know if time is as important as these two, but that was just my deduction from what you're saying.
Well, it's probably benefit, scope, cost, time, quality. I think risk is managed, but it's not. I mean, at least in the elements we're not going to kill anybody. We're not going to lose the satellite. We're not going to, those elements are not going to appear. So they are low and tangible. But how come if risk is, I guess it could be argued that could also be just part of the scope. Surely that the item being defined needs to meet a 99.9% reliability factor or whatever that may be. I mean,
so I was doing a project training for NATO recently, and risk was definitely on top of their list. And you can imagine because of what they do, what they've done in Afghanistan, and obviously doing in other places as well. Within each project, risk is the same way you mentioned that quality there's prominence on quality within your organization. With them, risk was an area of prominence for them.
So is that why it's done like that? It's just to emphasize that this particular box is, top level importance and not under something else. So it's very clear at the top level that risk elements are, numero 1 or a severely important and not. It's just scope, and therefore it's a buried view underneath all of that, or quality, whatever you may assign it to, just to sort of, you know, step it upwards to the front of everybody's mind.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that everything would be of the same priority. No. So the same way sustainability hasn't been my priority in terms of projects I manage, is the same thing.
Yeah, no, mine doesn't exist.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the case. They would all have different priorities depending on the environment, the project, you know, organization, etc. That's why, like I said, I was just barely a month ago, I was delivering a training to NATO in Luxembourg, and that was what applied with them. They had their projects are measured in terms of performance. A lot of it is, whilst it includes some of these risks, is at the forefront of it. Mark?
I have a question that it's not related with this, which is that there is a colleague that wants to speak with me at lunchtime, and I don't know where will be the lunch break.
It will be 11:40. That's not your 11. It will be your 12, between 12:30 and 12:45.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
We would stop somewhere once I get an opportunity around 12:30. After 12:30, I'll look to stop somewhere.
Okay.